Poetry is just the evidence of life. If your life is burning well, poetry is just the ash. Leonard Cohen.
Because I just finished my master's in creative writing. And I mean, there were like 12 or 13 students in my cohort of my year. And it was just so obvious to me the whole time I was in that class or in that program that I'd spent my 20s like living in foreign countries and taking drugs and being really irresponsible. I was like, but I have so much material to write from.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Artists Like Us, where we explore the creative journeys of those that you might pass by every day. Your neighbor, your coworker, your best friend. We're here to shine a light on the artists among us, the ones balancing their passions with the sometimes pleasant and often harsh realities of life. I'm your host, Janita Richards, and together we'll dive into the stories, struggles, and successes of the creative souls who may not be household names, but who do make our worlds more vibrant. Let's discover the artistry that surrounds us with the Artists Like Us. And today, the artist like us that is joining me is Sabrina Pinksen. That's how you pronounce Pinksen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sabrina is a brilliant painter and also an author, and we met in Hanoi, just having similar groups of friends. I cannot pinpoint exactly when we met. It's just a great community out there, and I'm so excited that we both lived over there at the same time. I'm so excited to have met you amongst many other creative people that were over there. So thank you for joining us today, Sabrina.
Thank you for having me.
So right off the bat, what I just need to talk about is, what was it like growing up in a town of 47 people?
Good way to start. When I was younger, there were more people. I'd say there was like 100 maybe when I was young, but
okay, about
anyway,
double the size, but still small.
Still very small. And that's a good place to start because it literally informs everything I do and all my creative work. And I was thinking about this morning, actually, because, you know, I grew up so isolated, like on an island, in a really small town on an island. So already, you know, double isolation. I think there is something that is kind of isolating about art making that I really like. Like, I like being able to just like go into a hidey hole of writing and not have to deal with the world for hours at a time. And the same with painting, you know, that is maybe somewhat related to the isolation of my youth. But also, what was it like growing up there? It was weird and wonderful in ways that and also traumatizing in ways that I'm only still figuring out, you know. I don't know how much you want to get into the chaos and all the complexities of growing up in rural Newfoundland, but there are a lot. And I mean, my community, my all my writing and my painting is essentially about my community. And when I was young, I hated it with a passion. I resented my family for making me stay there because I was really lonely and really bored. And but now as an adult, I hold it with such reverence, and I love it so much. And I'm thinking of moving back there and raising a child there. So yeah.
I feel like it's a great background for a writer and a painter. Those are two of the art forms that really require so little. Writing especially, you just can pick up a piece of paper and pick up a pen or a pencil. And now, of course, we have the laptops. I think many of us are not writing our great American novels on paper and pencil, but I'm sure some of us are. And painting as well. They're two very isolating things that are very beautiful. As a writer myself, I do romanticize like the thoroughness of going off to the woods, right? And just locking yourself up and saying, I've got to just buckle down and do this. Has your family always been in Newfoundland?
Yeah. My parents were born and raised in the same town that they live in now. My grandparents are like from or adjacent to that town, and the generation before them as well. So yeah, my family, it's like been 200 years or something, like
That's
before
beautiful.
yeah, before Newfoundland joined Canada in the 40s, the late 40s. So we were like a dominion under Britain before that. So yeah, we're like we've been around for a while. And talking also about, you know, writing and only needing a pen and paper and all that, but my so I guess a part of a quality or a symptom of rural communities is we I come from like a really a big tradition of oral storytelling, you know.
Mm.
So my family, how I grew up was sitting with my family, who are all, you know, my parents have like 7 siblings each or something like that, and then my grandparents, and everyone just telling stories, you know, of what it was like when they were young. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, that storytelling tradition is, I think I'm tapping into a lot of that when I'm writing the stories that I write.
Did, I guess, your first inclination of wanting to write come from maybe wanting to preserve these stories that you were hearing but couldn't flip back and read and share with someone else?
I don't think so. I mean, that's what it is for me now.
Mm.
It's about, you know, telling stories of my community and stories that I grew up hearing. But I think my first inclination of writing was just trying to express feelings that were so abstract in my mind, and trying
Mm.
to. I used to write songs and poems, and my dad used to find them. I'd be like, "Oh, it's pretty good, actually."
Um,
Yeah.
we often see art and creative as like this very bohemian lifestyle kind of thing. Like when you think of the artist, you think of the artist plodding around in a city and not in a really small town of 47 people. And I think that my other question was just how did you even, and this is such a silly question, I'm very aware of it, but it's like how did you even know that art existed? Were your parents artists? Were the people around you artists?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think um, to a degree, I didn't, you know. My parents are, my father's a fisherman and my mom is a nurse. They're both pretty much retired now. But my parents, I've been thinking lately how, in some degree, um, the yardstick that we could use to measure the success of like the kids that I grew up with was like our father's alcoholism
No,
and
man.
the varying degrees of it. But my dad was kind of different in a way that he was more like bookish, I think, than some of the other people's parents that I grew up with. He used to get like Time magazines delivered to our house every month.
Mm.
And there were a lot of books my parents both read. So I grew up around books, which I'm really grateful for. But in terms of like myself as a painter, I have an older sister. She's 7 years older than me, and she had an interest in art. Um,
Mm.
and I remember when she was like getting ready to go to school, like applying to universities and stuff. She was trying to get into an art school, and I remember her drawings being everywhere, and like the things that she was putting together for a portfolio, and I was like so impressed by it all.
Oh.
Um, so I think in many ways, my sister was actually like one of the people that modeled for me what was kind of possible in the world beyond where I grew up.
Mhm.
And she like left Newfoundland for school, and she went into, actually, she's an interior designer. She has her own business in Alberta. Um, so yeah, I think because she kind of forged away and was also very supported by my parents in her forging away, I kind of recognized what was maybe possible.
Mhm.
But her and I have talked a lot about this, that like when we grew up in the place that we grew up, we really, I knew I could be a teacher. I knew I could be a doctor. Knew I could be a nurse. I knew I could be an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much all I knew. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually, because I'm going to do a gig later this month. And I'm going to be visiting some of the schools in the area where I grew up and delivering like workshops to some of the students
Very
about like
cool.
writing. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm also nervous, but about writing and like how to make a career in the literary arts. And I'm thinking about, what I wish I had known when I was young and what I wish people had told me. And yeah, I liked to draw when I was young, but I wasn't really interested in pursuing like visual art in any way. I really loved writing. And when I came to finish high school, and my parents were always like, you have to go to university. You have to go to university. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to study? I had no idea, but I knew I loved writing. I was like, I'll get an English degree, I guess. But I remember being in like the 12th grade and like complaining to my teachers, I guess I'll study English, but I really don't want to be a teacher. And that
Mm-hmm.
felt like the only option after an English degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I went and got an English degree. So, and then I became an English teacher in Asia. So,
So it was useful.
yeah, totally.
It sounds like your parents were very supportive of both you and your sister's artistic pursuits and what you wanted to do. Did you, were you expecting that? I mean, considering that you are in a small town, your parents have these very specific careers that people can very much picture, and it sounds like everyone else in the town did as well. And I'm wondering, were you and your sister kind of the first people in the town to break away and kind of try to do these things?
I think probably yes.
Wow.
When I think about, I don't know, I grew up with like a dozen, probably less than a dozen kids, and for my sister, there were even less, I think, of her age. It's kind of like skipped a generation or something. Um, but yeah, I think we definitely have some of the more interesting paths out of the people that have come from my community. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. You said something at the beginning of that I was going to comment on.
I was talking about your parents having very
Oh,
definable
yes.
careers.
Yeah. So my mom hated her job as a nurse.
Mm.
And she was
It's not
always
easy.
like, yeah, no, definitely. So also, like, the community that I grew up in was really impacted economically. Before I was born, most uh, everyone who wasn't a fisherman or worked in the nearby mines worked at the fish plant where they like processed codfish. And then in 1992, this big moratorium happened, and the codfishery collapsed, and everyone lost their jobs. And the government paid everyone to like retrain. So that's how my mom became a nurse. Um, and my father didn't have a traditional like means of employment. He worked offshore, so he was gone for weeks at a time, and then so it was seasonal, so he would be home for like long months of the year and then gone for weeks at a time throughout the summer and the spring and stuff. So I think the general atmosphere of the industries that I kind of grew up in were so like up and down and undependable that my parents were just like, whatever you do, I hope it's better than this. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And my dad having two daughters, if I was a boy, I would probably be more involved in the work that of my dad, and that's always
Mm-hmm.
been very obvious to me. And he said it very plainly. Um, but yeah, I think just the general economic atmosphere of where I grew up and not having a lot of options, my parents they really just wanted us to be happy, I think, and they
Mm-hmm.
wanted us to be successful. and whatever that meant to them, whatever that meant to us was going to be okay with them, you know? But I do think they probably got frustrated with me throughout my 20s of like my years of being in Asia. And one
Yeah, I mean,
time,
they're your 20s and you're in Asia.
yeah, yeah, exactly. One time, I think after I'd first moved to Vietnam and I'd already done a year in South Korea, my dad was like, maybe it's time for you to come home and get a real job. But that was the only time that they've ever like impressed some sort of like lack of patience or frustration with like the path I had made for myself, you know?
Mhm. What does success mean to you?
Right now, um, like I think a success for me has always looked like the freedom of making my own schedule and working in a
Mm.
way that I've decided for myself. Um, I think that was what was most important to me. If I could do that and also pay my bills, I thought I would be, you know, successful. So I'm there, you know.
Mhm.
But now I'm
Congratulations.
also thanks. Now I'm also like some more money would really be nice.
Yeah.
So I feel like the bar of success is always kind of changing.
hmm No, that makes total sense. I want to go back to your teaching seminars to younger students about like
Mhm.
what a career path in art could look like. Can you talk
Mhm.
more about that?
Hmm. So it's a job that's being offered through like Writers NL, Writers Newfoundland, kind of like our writing union, sort of. Um, part of
A writing
being
union. We got to talk about that too.
yeah. So part of one of the wonderful things about where I live and the province in which I live is that is incredibly there's a lot of art support. Um and I don't really know what it's like in the States, but in Canada in general, I think there is a lot of support for the arts. It could be a lot better, but there
hmm
is a fair amount. And in Newfoundland specifically, we have a really rich artistic culture. Like more traditional modes of art, maybe in like craft and storytelling and music as well. There's a lot of theater that happens here, so I'm really grateful for that. And the job that I've been offered is through the Writers Union. So they put out a call. Well, the government in the provincial government this year declared 2024 as the year of the arts. So they
Cute.
put out a book. Yeah, very cute. They put out a bunch of extra funding for arts organizations and artists. So there's been a lot more opportunities this year that I've noticed in years past, I guess, because of that extra funding. And this program is part of the Year of the Arts.
And I guess this is what ages are the students? Are they college kids?
So they're high school students mostly, but I'm also gonna do so it's up to me what how I offer it. Like I applied to the open call with like
Mhm.
a idea for programming that I'd made myself, and like I had to contact the schools that I would be working with and get their confirmation that they were interested in working with me. So yeah, I'm going to focus mostly on high school students, but part of the way that the schools are in the area that I'm from, which there are so many rural communities, like there's a few thousand people in this area, but there's like 5 or 6 schools because they're so far apart, right?
Mm.
So some of the students in the classes, like there's multiple grades in one class, and there might be like 10 students from multiple grades in one class. So I'm going to be working with students as young as grade 4 and up until the 12th grade.
What are you going to tell them? Maybe I need to hear the same thing.
So for the older students, um, I've imagined this to be 2 separate seminars or workshops. One is like a more practical focused seminar, and it's more tailored to older students who are about to be going, you know, out into the world,
Mm.
and it's outlining, you know, my path toward the arts and the resources that are available to them and what, you know, a career in the arts can look like, in reality. And we'll also talk about, grants and how to conceptualize like creative projects and stuff like that. Then there's the second seminar is more creative focused, and it's essentially, a creative writing workshop, but I'm specifically tailoring it to students who grew up in rural communities like I did, and a way to, examine their own lives and their families and like their community experiences, and using that as material to create writing from.
That sounds great. I think that more and more students should be having these kinds of things. We kind of have that in the state. I mean, the states are huge, right? So it's I have no idea what they're doing in other states really. I studied writing in undergrad, and I want to. It's funny that you're talking about English and like being a teacher, because we had a writing department and we had an English department, and the English department, what was it? It had too many teachers, I think, for the amount. I can't remember what it was. Too many teachers for the amount of students, or maybe the vice versa. And there was a point where they wanted to combine the writing and the English departments, and like all of our writing professors basically like sat us down. They're like, don't let them do that. You guys need to speak up. They're like, do you want to be English teachers? We're like, no. And I can't forget this because it was so funny. Somehow what came out of that was very much big. Like, we're writers. We make the rules. We're not teaching the rules. We don't have to follow the rules. We're just making the rules. We don't have to use punctuation if we don't want to, this whole thing. So I thought that was really funny, you saying, oh, I'm studying English, but I don't really want to be a teacher, because that was also very much in our heads. Okay, yeah, if you are in the English department, you're going to be an English teacher or professor or something like that. But what I was going to get into is that recently, basically right after I came back from Vietnam, one of my writing professors had reached out, and they said, hey, would you come do a panel for the freshman writing students? Basically, they didn't say as much, but it was basically like, let them know that you can still survive after studying writing. And I said, I don't know, can you? It's not really clear to me. But I did go, and I said, hey, I don't have a writing job per se. I write in my job. I actually was hired partly because I had this writing degree, and they're like, oh, like you can communicate clearly via writing. And I said, I taught English in Vietnam, but I did say to the students, I said, if you ever go teach English in another country, you should definitely do that because it's sick. But you should also focus on paying off your student loans. I did not do that because I was having too much fun. No regrets, though. I'm not really bothered by any of that. But I did try to offer this kind of excitement to these students, and I loved that. I love students. I love this. They had lots of questions, and there were other people on the panel who were actually in writing jobs, so they didn't have to just see, well, this girl is crazy. They saw, okay, this person has a job in writing, this person has a job. But I said, you don't really have to have a job in writing. You could also just have lots and lots of fun. Consider that.
You must have lots and lots of fun.
I was like, what am I going to write about if I don't go experience a life? What am I going to
do? Exactly.
But
you must live in order to write.
Absolutely. It's when someone tries to write a memoir when they're 18 or something. It's like, it just happened. You have at least 6 more years of reflecting to actually know, oh, wait, that was weird.
Yeah. I was just thinking, because I just finished my master's in creative writing, and I mean there were like 12 or 13 students in my cohort of my year, and it was just so obvious to me the whole time I was in that class or in that program that I'd spent my 20s like living in foreign countries and taking drugs and being really irresponsible. I was like, but I have so much material to write from.
Yeah, it makes you a better writer for sure. Come on. You just got to take it all in. But I'm glad we're talking about your MFA, because that is what I wanted to get into, and then I got lost. So very cool that you got an MFA in writing. I think that's super brave and also just sounds like the dream because you're just forced to write a bunch. But when I initially met you and followed you on Instagram, I was just, oh my goodness, she's a brilliant painter. Like those are my first thoughts. I thought these paintings are so cool. So in my head, I saw you as a painter. I didn't even know that you were a writer until I had been kind of following your stories on Instagram and you just posting about getting your MFA and winning these awards and stuff. And I guess because I'm a writer and I'm like, oh, well, I'm just doing this. I wish I could pick up a paintbrush. If I could, I'm like, surely I would be a painter. So my question for you is, what makes you more drawn to writing over painting?
Yeah. Well, I think my first like love was books. You
Mm,
know, I've just I've been transformed by a book a lot more often than I have been, through a painting or
mm,
like visual art. It's also something that I was exposed to, a lot younger. Um, Writing to me is so much harder than painting. It's so hard. It's
mm-hmm,
really hard to, you know, achieve the quality of writing that I want to achieve. Um, Whereas painting, it's changing for me now. The longer I spend painting, and also like the more exposed I am now to like quality visual art. But when I first started out, um, like kind of dabbling in visual art, in my head, like realism seemed like the hardest thing that I could do. So I was
mm-hmm.
like, that's what I'm going to try to do then. Like that seems the most challenging. And then I did it, and I was like, it's not that hard. I just got to look at something and figure out how to recreate it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, my brain can do that. I get, thankfully. um, so for me, yeah, writing was just more challenging. It was more immersive, I think, and it satisfies my brain in a way that painting doesn't. But painting also satisfies my brain in a way that writing doesn't. But now I think that I've spent more time um you know consuming visual art, and also I think even the MFA, even though it was in writing, also um it lended me a little bit of like aestheticism teaching, and I
Mm-hmm.
think my taste for painting has changed. So the images that I'm more interested in painting now have changed, and I'm finding it a lot more challenging to make the kind of visual art that I want to. So yeah, now I'm being challenged in a way that I wasn't, and as my writing is kind of catching up to where I want it to be, the bar for my visual art is kind of rising, and I'm struggling to catch that. So
MFA in studio art on the horizon.
no, I need like 7 years to recover from academia again before I can think about it.
That's so fair. Um, I want to know exactly how you pursued this MFA in writing. I want to know how you chose a school, how you like what the entrance, the barriers for entrance was, how you compiled your portfolio, um, all these things. Walk me through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When when I moved back from Vietnam, I kind of had the thought that I would go do my master's. It kind of seemed a reason for me to come home, and something that I could focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, once I got back in Canada, I started thinking about that right away. Um, I applied. So in Canada, there's not actually a lot of MFA programs. There's only like a handful. And I was like looking at what was possible. Um, and I ended up applying to my school here in Newfoundland, the one where I'd got my undergrad. But it was not an MFA program, it was an MA program in
Mm-hmm.
English, but you could do a creative thesis if you chose to. So I applied to that school. And after looking at all the other schools in Canada, I decided that there's a really good program in Vancouver Island, sorry, UBC. They have a really good creative writing program, but I was like, I am not moving back to Canada to be close to my family and then going to the other side of the country and being far away from
Mm,
them again.
yeah.
So I was like, if I apply to a school in Toronto, that's a lot more. I have a lot of family in Ontario. So it's like, that's a lot closer to, home for me and a lot easier to get back and forth. It's just a 3-hour plane ride versus, I don't know, 5 or 6. So, yeah, and the school I applied to, the University of Guelph, they had a really good funding program. And they also just like, it seemed like a really good, interesting program. There was like a mentorship semester where you could work with someone of your choosing. And yeah, so I applied to both those schools. I got accepted to the University of Guelph before I got accepted to Memorial University here in Newfoundland. And I was really annoyed by that, that I didn't immediately get accepted here at MUN. But also it's like a much smaller department and they only accepted so many students. So they put me on a wait list here.
Oh no, the disrespect.
Yeah, I know. I was so annoyed. How dare you? But anyway, then they like offered, accepted me into the program, and it turned like the school here in Newfoundland offered less funding, but the cost of living would be a lot lower, so the funding would have gone a lot further.
Mm-hmm.
But then the funding for the school in Toronto was also really good. But at that time, I had a boyfriend here in Newfoundland, and I was like, oh, do I really want to leave the province and go do this long distance relationship and blah, 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 blah. But the school in Toronto appealed to me a lot more than the one here.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a professor here at this school specifically who's one of my favorite writers, and I really wanted to work with her. So that's kind of the reason that I was thinking about accepting the program here in Newfoundland. But anyway, I when I was living in Asia, sometimes I would make decisions. I was like, what is the scariest decision to me, and what is going to be the most challenging?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one I would go with, So the school in Toronto, I was like, that's going to be the scariest. That's what I'm going to do. So, and also Paul, my partner, was like, so if I go to Toronto, will we still stay together? He was like, obviously. I was like, oh, okay. So
Perfect.
I was like, yeah, I guess I'm going then. So yeah, that is how I picked that school.
I love
What else
that,
did you
choosing
want to know?
the scary thing, because I totally get that. It's like, okay, I want to do the thing that's going to make my brain explode a little bit. The
Yeah.
other parts of my questions were, what did that application process look like?
Right. I had to put together a portfolio. Um, yeah, it was portfolio and references. Those I think were the two biggest things. And the references really scared me because I was a really bad student when I was in my undergrad. Like I didn't go to class. I didn't get great grades. I was like partying and living my
You were
best
having
life. And
fun.
I was having fun. I was having so much fun. So I like emailed some of my teachers and was like, you probably don't know me. If I'm being honest, I wasn't I wasn't a good student, but blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, I'd also enrolled in some creative writing diploma classes that were being offered by my undergrad school. So I had like at least one current teacher that I was working with that could write me a reference. And yeah, my portfolio, which was, by that time I'd already been working on this project, which it started out as a memoir, but I got really annoyed with it being a memoir and also memoirs in general.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it was creative nonfiction is what I was calling it.
Of course.
So yeah, I'd been working on that for years. So I had like a substantial amount of material, that was fairly polished to send off as my portfolio. So yeah, that's what I submitted, and that's what they accepted me on, and they offered me like a scholarship for like based on what I'd achieved so far, I think was the qualifying for that particular scholarship. So
It was
yeah,
merit
it worked
based.
out. Yeah, well, there was like a general funding that every student got if you got accepted to the program, but then there was other scholarships that would be applied to you if you, I guess, reached that bar, which, yeah.
Which I did.
I did.
So what I'm also always curious about with people who go get masters, especially in rigorous programs, how much of that funding covered your life, and what did you do about the rest that didn't cover your life?
Yeah. So I was really lucky, and I feel bad, honestly, because some of the students in my program, Toronto is an expensive city to live in. It's not as expensive as New York, I'm sure, but it's a lot more expensive than where
Don't
I
remind
live.
me.
And a lot of the students, you know, who I was going to school with didn't get as much funding as I did, and they had to pay rent, and I didn't have to pay rent because I was living with my mom's friend and her husband, who took me in and fed me and just like parented me essentially the whole time I was there. So
Don't have to feel
the
guilty about that. That's your family. That's amazing and that's great.
yeah. So I was really lucky and so fortunate. So that the money that school gave me, it all it did really was cover all my tuition, and I got like an extra $500 every semester that they gave me. Obviously, that didn't go very far, but yeah, I also TA'd for a semester, which paid me a little bit. So it mostly just covered my expenses for the most part. Yeah.
Do you feel like your MFA program and the things that you experienced, the things that you learned for it, do you think that that was a worthwhile endeavor to who you are now as a writer?
Yes. Yeah. Um. Yes. 100%. I wanted to do an MFA because, I'd been working on this project for so long and I was so frustrated by it. I had taken myself as far as I could on my own, and I really needed help to, you know, get to the point that I wanted to be. Um, and also, if I didn't do the MFA, would have had to get a job.
No, not a job.
And I really didn't want to. So
Fair.
yeah, it served a really practical purpose. I was like, I could put off having to get a job for like 2 years if I do this MFA program. Um, so yes, for both of those reasons, it was worth it to me. But also, I'm so happy that I chose that program in Toronto because I like the Canadian literary world is very small and it's very focused in Toronto. And for, the 3 semesters that I was living up there, I really got to be part of it and to witness what that was like, which was really cool. I got to work with and be taught by some of like these incredible writers and teachers. And it's funny that the professor that was at the school here in Newfoundland, which was the reason I was being drawn to that program, she ended up being my mentor during the mentorship semester of the program I did in Toronto. So yeah, she was the person who I chose, and luckily she was happy to work with me. And that mentorship semester was a dream come true to me. Like to work with like one of my literary idols and to like have her validation and encouragement. And her brain is in some ways like all over my novel and the things that she kind of really encouraged me to. So yes, 100%. It was worth it.
Did you finish the novel?
Yeah, I finished the novel. It I want to give it another round of revision before I do like the next step, which would like trigger putting it out into the world. So like trying to find an agent and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But in the weeks leading up to submitting it to my, committee, my thesis committee, I was just spending like 12 hours a day looking at this novel. And, you as a writer know what happens when you do that, the words just lose their meaning.
Yeah, you have
So
to throw up.
exactly. So I am on a break from it now. And
Hmm.
I will probably take a look at it again next month, maybe this month, and start revisions and then do what comes after.
I love hearing that you have to take a break from it because I sometimes feel really guilty taking a break from some things. It's only recently that I'm becoming a very guilt-free person. I'm just like, that is not an emotion I am interested in anymore. So, but it's so often that I'm just so sucked into things, and then I'm like, well, I just need to step away from this anymore. I have nothing good that I can offer it. I'm not really interested in it anymore, and that's not what I want to feel. And so I feel that I've developed this mentality of I can pick up anything again. Like there are things that I'll start knowing that I'm not going to finish them and being like, that's okay. There's something that recently I had taken, I had been writing it. I sent it to a friend to look at the beginning of the summer, and he had went through and give his feedback, didn't even look at it. And then just something else triggered me really like a few weeks ago to go back and look at it. And I felt okay about that. Usually I would feel like, oh, like I don't know if I should. Is she mad at me? Is she being the piece that I'm writing? And so it feels really comforting to hear that you also need to take that break, especially when other people are asking about it, right? Like, oh, like what's going on? We're on a break.
Yeah, that's huge. And I feel very similar to you, that this is a new thing that I don't feel guilty over anymore. I used to be someone who needed to start something and finish it. And I couldn't go on to something else until I had finished what I was working on. And I'm not about that life anymore.
No.
I don't feel any guilt. No, the same in writing and painting. Like, it's good to take breaks and take a pause from something, and gives you fresh eyes when you return to it, and also like it feeds the other projects that you're working on in the meantime. It's so important. So important.
Yeah, it's you come back with fresh eyes and also a new appreciation. I mean, you've lived more life, right? We were talking about just living life and how you need to have the experiences to have it, right? Or you lived more life and you can come back to it with just a totally fresh perspective. And I am so grateful for the breaks that I have taken, especially once you start to grow to like you're writing something and then you start to hate it. That's when you know it's like, okay, we need some time off. Like that's
Yeah,
so frequent.
absolutely. And the things that, I'm working on a short story right now that I started like, I don't know, when I was first started my program, so like 2 years ago or something, and I haven't looked at in ages. And I thought it was really good, but I kind of thought I was done. I was submitting it to like magazines and stuff. And now I've been looking at it, I was like, oh, there's so many problems here.
Like freaking yikes.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was I thinking? Yeah, no,
Uh-huh.
I find that too. When you like jump the gun to start like feeling, oh, this is done, and then you look at it like a month later and you're like, oh my god, so sorry that I thought this was
Yeah.
done.
Writing is so embarrassing.
It's so embarrassing. I wrote a poem the other day and I don't really write poetry anymore.
Mhm.
It was very college me, but I don't really write poetry, but something had happened and inspired me to write a poem. And I like the person who I written the poem about, I sent it to him and well he asked for it and then he's like, wow, this is really good, da da da, like you should submit it. And I'm like, you can't trick me. This is a first draft. It's like, yeah, you think it's good because you understand everything about it, but this is a it's not even like a first draft. It was like a heat of the moment draft. I'm like,
Oh, sometimes
to,
the heat of the moment drafts surprise you though, with like how coherent they are when you read them later. You're like, oh yeah, I was like fueled by the heat of the moment. This makes
yeah.
sense.
No, I definitely like it. I like what I wrote a lot, but I know that I'm just gonna give it some time. I'm gonna go back to it and make sure there are already some words that I'm like, that's not the word you wanted to use.
Time, man. Time is so helpful.
It's so helpful. Something that I wanted to ask before, but I totally slipped my mind is your relationship with your paintings and your writings, or rather your writings relationships with your paintings. Do you find that they influence each other? Do you think that they're coming from the same place of storytelling?
Yeah. Yes. Um, like I guess some of my writing, at least because when I access writing through like a very personal lens. It was just like me trying to make sense of myself and my life. So my writing started out being a lot more personal than what it has become. And now it's a lot more about families and communities and the stories that I grew up hearing and, how that informed me essentially. My memoir became a fiction
Hmm.
eventually, but there's still a lot of me in there. But yeah, my paintings are all about my family. Um, I think a lot about work and labor and how that informs communities. I say that my visual art is I'm using it to kind of challenge the erasure of rural communities.
Mm.
So something that happens here in Newfoundland is when towns are really small, they can vote to be resettled. So, and if it passes a vote and it passes like a financial assessment by the government will pay residents of the community to leave, and then they'll shut off all the services to the towns. So they
Oh.
essentially become they essentially become summer communities. It's happened historically because there are islands off the island that need ferry service. There were some towns because we're like a fishing province. There were towns that were only accessible by boat that didn't have roads. So the government would need to put a lot of money in to put a new road places, and it was just more feasible to pay people to leave the communities than to invest in infrastructure for them. Um, and it used to be that communities had to vote 90% in favor of resettling them, and then the government would come in and do like a financial assessment. But only in recent years they lowered it to a 75% vote.
Mm. That's
Yeah,
so
so I
low.
yeah, it's really low. So I always grew up kind of being aware that my community could be resettled. And then like in recent years, I actually thought it was going to happen for a minute, and like they were going to get together and vote. My dad is the mayor. It's a funny thing, but he'd already like kind of done the legwork to see if it would pass a financial assessment, and it wouldn't because my community is pretty close to a bigger community, and we're so small, they don't spend a lot of money to keep us going, so it wouldn't be worth it to resettle us.
Mhm.
But the threat of that was always really real to me. Um, so I think of my writing and my paintings are both like working to challenge that, and I feel so deeply passionate about um the future of like rural communities in rural Newfoundland and like just like the livelihoods of people that live rurally here. And I think my writing and painting are both like an extension of that.
Why am I like emotional thinking about this resettling concept I've just never heard of? It feels really devastating to me. It's also interesting to think that you were so far away in Asia, and I'm sure, like, I mean, you said you grew up kind of hating where you had come from. I think as many um weirdos in small towns with big dreams feel that way, and then you go far away, but you still have this thought. And what's in my head right now, and I can't stop thinking of for whatever reason, is Bon Jovi's "Who Says You Can't Go Home." I feel like as I get older, I'm like, yeah, that song is too real. That song is too real. And a little logistics questions with resettling. Does the town then become nothing? It's just
uh,
empty land?
the houses are all still there. What usually happens is that people keep going to them as summer homes. So people will like get a generator and stuff and just visit their towns in the summertime. And it's happened that like oh, some of my parents' friends had like cabins in a resettled town, but now they essentially live there. There's no electricity to these towns, but like they're just run on generators like all year long. So there is like, and there's a island off the coast of Newfoundland, so like a small island that people used to live on that required ferry service, and then it got resettled a few years ago or a while ago, I guess. But there's one couple that still lives out there, and they just live by themselves, and they have a little boat. They come back to the main island when they need to stock up on supplies, and then they just go out and live off the grid. So yeah, that's kind of what happens. And I'd always, I used to think about it a lot. I'd look around my town and I'd be like, what will happen to this place? And it's, some places don't even need to be officially resettled because the people that live there, just like the young people all leave and older people die, right? So they just kind of stop being communities naturally. And there's one place nearby where I live. I think it's the coolest community. It's called Round Harbor. And I took my friends there this summer. I visited a few years ago, and there was only sign of like one of the houses like kind of being inhabited as a summer home. And there's no road through this community. When you come down over a big dirt road onto like a big wharf where there are big fishing boats. But then on the right and left side, it's just footpaths and like a trail for like a four-wheeler or something to go up them. And there was an old school and an old church and like all these houses that have, the doors were all open and you could go in through them and like see, they were just left, like people left them and meant to come back and then they never did. And there were sheets on the bed and everything, but no one had been there for years.
Wow.
And then I just visited there again this summer. I took my friends and my partner, and more of the houses are being inhabited now. So like it's still mainly a summer home. I don't know if there's electricity to it or not, but yeah, it's like seasonal residents that are kind of maintaining the community. And I think there is happening here very slowly a bit of resurgence in rural life. I think a lot of it is happening through the arts mainly. There's an island off Newfoundland. It's called Fogo Island, and there's a big inn, like a hotel, that was built a few years ago, and it's like thousands of dollars to stay there per night, and it's been in Vogue magazine, and our Justin Trudeau goes there, and Gwyneth goes there. So there's like a resurgence kind of happening.
I mean, yeah, it sounds super romantic.
Yeah. So that is kind of trickling down to other parts of the province, I think, slowly but surely.
I want to, like, hearing this, I'm realizing I didn't even ask you if you're willing to share what is your novel about.
Yeah. So currently it's titled Headlong. Think this will be the name of it. It's changed names so much, but it's titled Headlong. It's about a young woman, Janine Canning, and she has moved back to her rural Outport community. And she's like 29, and her community is about to vote on resettlement. So that's like the present day timeline, and then embedded within that is kind of the catalyst for Janine first leaving her home. So when Janine was younger, her first cousin died, and he was like a cousin who lived in Ontario, but they were quite close, and then he dies when they're 22, and she understands their relationship as being the catalyst that makes her leave Newfoundland and Canada altogether. And then she returns home, And yeah, the resettlement thing is happening, and it's a lot to do with her family and her community, and also, the relationships she had with her cousin.
Um, wow. I just am thinking about how I'm just so interested in reading this. I'm so excited for it to go wherever it goes, because just hearing this, like you telling me about resettlement, which I had no idea before, I was just immediately entranced. I mean, and when I was mentioning how like I used the word romantic in describing this small rural life, I think people who are, very accustomed to like big city, big city, big city, like my girl Gwyneth Paltrow, they they will look at these small places and feel that. And I don't know, you were just born to tell this story, and I hope that you feel that way, because that's how I feel talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, sometimes I do feel that way. I know some writers and artists talk about like they had no choice in them becoming doing the kind of work they do, and I
Mm-hmm.
really don't. I had no choice. It was a compulsion. Like so the it's obviously my rural community, but also when I was in my early 20s, my cousin died, and that was kind of the thing in my young life that happened that took me years to deal with, and was also the reason that I understand it as being one of the reasons that I went to Asia and taught. And so yeah, it's a story I have to tell, but I've
Mm-hmm.
been working on it for like 8-9 years or something. I am so looking forward to putting it behind me and
Yeah,
being able to work on something new. So
it'll be exciting once you are finished with it and you put it out and it's not yours anymore. I don't know if you feel that way. Like it becomes everyone else's. Everyone else gets to apply whatever they feel coming from it
yeah,
to it, and it's not so close to you anymore.
yeah, I feel like once you make the art, it's kind of none of your business what the world thinks of it after. Like,
Yeah.
it's none of my business anymore. I've done the thing. Here you go. I imagine like that's a lot easier to say than what it is in real life once that all happens. But yes, I agree. The world's after. It's no longer mine.
I don't know who I was talking to, or even if I was talking to someone, maybe I read it online, but they were in this conversation that I maybe or maybe not had. They were talking about I do have friends in the film industry, so I feel like it was a conversation that I had. But they're talking about people who write scripts or write novels that then get turned into movies, and how just sometimes that adaptation is so different from what the writer initially intended, and how oftentimes the writers just don't even care anymore. They're like, I did my job, I wrote it, I spent 8 years writing it. Whatever you want to do with it, do it. Like I don't. It's not my child anymore. Like they're starting their own family.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I was just listening to a podcast with Sally Rooney, who was
Ooh.
talking about the two shows that came out of her books and stuff. And she, I guess, eventually decided not to do any more film adaptations because she found like the fame that came with it, especially for the young actors. Like she wouldn't about that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but also it's really interesting to think about because at one hand, I've heard writers say that writing the script, like an adaptation of your work, is really fun and you should absolutely be involved. And also, it's more money and
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
all those things. But yeah, I can't imagine still being with this thing that I've worked on for so long, then in a different form. I
Yeah.
just it's like beating a dead horse now. I'm ready to be done with it. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny to think that way, because I feel likely initially when you start, you can't imagine anyone else with their hands on it. You can't imagine anyone interpreting it in any way besides how you are putting it on paper. And then by the end, it's like You think it's about a horse? Sure, it's about a horse.
Yeah, I don't care anymore. Like, and that's something that probably needs to happen. I think you probably have to distance yourself from the work in a way that's healthy and maybe a little bit detached, because
Mhm.
I think it would be so intolerable or just painful to go around feeling so precious over it, And also, you
Yeah,
have to make room for the things that you're going to make after, the work that's going to come after. So, I don't know.
of course, unless you just make that one great American novel and just be done with it.
If it
Or
paid me
Canadian
well
novel,
enough,
rather.
yeah, which will never happen.
You never know. Oh, well, speaking of paying you well enough and the writer writing the novels and then writing the script and getting more money, do you have a job now? Have you graduated the MFA program and now it's like, well, I have to get a job, or how are we living life?
I refuse to get a job.
Woo!
No, this is really an important conversation. I grew up being so financially illiterate, so it is
Mhm,
really, um, it's really important. And, famously, the arts does not pay very well. So
mhm.
getting a job is really, a necessity for so many artists. Um, I find myself to be really lucky and fortunate. My writing has not paid very well. I did win some awards this year, which gave me, I can be transparent about that. It's probably like I made maybe like 10 grand this year from awards for writing.
Congratulations.
So
That's a lot
thank,
of money to make from writing, really.
yeah, yeah. Well, if you stretch it over, the 8 years that I've been working on this thing, it's not. And I will probably not see any more money from this novel, for many years until maybe it sells to a publisher.
Until I buy it.
So, yeah, yeah, exactly. So, um, there's that. My visual art is mostly what funds my life, my paintings. Um, there's a lot of support here locally, so my paintings this year were collected by a provincial procurement program, so like a museum slash gallery procured one of my paintings, which paid a few grand, and then the city procured a painting which paid a few grand, and then I do some commissions and that pays like some money here and there. And I got a grant this year which is helping pay for things. But if I did not have, a partner who was also like supportive, I would probably have to get a job. I think about that a lot.
Okay, so
If
step
I was
one,
a,
get a boyfriend.
if I was a single person, I would probably have to get another means of income. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's my relationship security. If Paul, I can't afford to leave him.
He got you. He got you. He said, "Yeah, go off to that little program in Toronto. I'll be right here."
Yeah. There's been times where I've been like, stressed about money. And I've asked him, I was like, should I get a job? And he's like, no. And honestly, that surprised me so much in the moment. I was like, really? Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so step one is actually get a boyfriend who's definitely not an artist.
Yes, very important. I used to think that I wanted a boyfriend or a partner who was an artist. I was like, yeah, we'll be like creative together and we could work with each other on projects. And I could not imagine actually something that would be worse than that. Like, I am enough artistic ego for one relationship. I would not want another in the mix. So yeah, get a boyfriend who's a teacher and who owns a house, solid income, reliable.
Okay, important advice. everyone listening, that is the important advice you must take away.
Yeah, if that's all I have to offer to you, that's it.
Sabrina, that is very, very good advice. And I think that we're going to have to close on that one, because if we go on for too long, we might loop back around and then somehow say date an artist, and we don't want people to leave with that. I look forward to your book whenever it comes out. I am always following you on Instagram and looking at your stories, so make sure you post about it there, because I will see it and I'll be excited.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this was great. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the great questions. I love also following you on the internet and seeing what, my life could be like in a parallel universe if I were to live in New York City and achieve those dreams of mine.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sabrina. And thank you, listeners. Thanks for being on Artists Like Us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for sitting down with Artists Like Us. I'm Janita Richards, and I want you to be inspired by the life that's lived by you, because of you, and all around you. Are you our next guest? Submit yourself or a friend at cabbagehouse.xyz/artistslikeus. If you're feeling up to it, leave the show a review and share it with your friends. It means a lot. Stay sweet, sexy, silly, and inspired. I'll see you here next time with another guest just as interesting as the last. Hey, you might even know them. Ciao for now.